Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Noble, and I'm so happy to see you guys all here. It's wonderful to see so many people passionate about accessibility. For those joining, All Things Open did not make a mistake on my name. It is actually spelled L-I-S-E. It is pronounced Lisa or Lise, but I get called Lise all the time, so if you can avoid that, that would be awesome. I am a distinguished UX and UI engineer from Discover Financial Services, and today I am presenting the A11Y Theme Builder, also known as the Accessibility Theme Builder. And it's a project that is very passionate to me. I am both an engineer and a front end and a little bit of back end engineer. I am a UI and UX designer as well. And I am definitely in love with open source. This is my first project, and in fact, it's Discover's first open source project. So it's really exciting to be here today. So here's a quick agenda that we're gonna go through today. I am gonna be sprinting through this presentation because there's a lot to cover, and I wanna give you guys a live demo of our project as well. So to get started, as I mentioned, I am a UX and a UI distinguished engineer. So one of the things I wanted to do was use UX to explore the way we are creating our UIs. So we applied design thinking to look at our end-to-end process. And to be honest, we found a ton of pain points. We found pain points on the engineer side, pain points on the designer side, on the product owner side, and definitely pain points in the end user experience. So we started to dig into that, and we thought, are there things that we could do to improve this experience? One of the big red flags that we identified is accessibility was often not on the radar for a lot of our product teams. This was for product teams creating internal projects as well as external projects. Or if it was on the radar, it was often at the end of the life cycle. If they were using a scanner to try and catch some accessibility issues, it meant that some of those issues had to go all the way back to the beginning of the life cycle. So we figured that there's got to be a better way. Anyway, in observing the complexities that we were facing, we understood that these complexities were not unique to Discover, right? Every company in the world is building a design system, right? They're building interfaces, and it's becoming more and more complex. We have mobile, we have tablet, we have desktop, we have wearables, we have light mode, we have dark mode, we have globalization, and of course, accessibility. And accessibility guidelines are constantly changing. So if you guys all just got up to date with 2.1, well, we have 2.2. In addition, designs, like fashion, should always be changing. So if you built a design system and it's now 5 years old, more than likely it kind of looks a little dated, right? So it takes thousands of design and engineer hours to create reusable and scalable components. Now that's if you do it right, we are hoping that you guys are building them to scale. But again, not all design systems are. So we're doing all of this work, everybody in their silos, to build components that are generally non-proprietary, right? There's nothing that unique about a button or a drop-down menu, and yet we're all doing it in our silos. The other thing that I should mention is our tools are also changing. So if you built an awesome design system in Figma 2 years ago, there's a new version out, right? That is better and more extensible, but now you have to rebuild the whole thing. So we also looked at accessibility, of course. And I'm sure everyone here is familiar with what accessibility is, but just in case, it means that someone who has a disability can complete a task in the same amount of time and effort as someone who doesn't have a disability. And of course, WCAG is really providing the guidelines for us on how to attain that for web applications. And for many of us, it's a legal obligation, right? Depending on the product that you're building, you may be federally required to meet these regulations. So among the different types of disability that we're thinking about when we talk about accessibility are visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive. And there really are 1 billion people in the world who have accessibility issues. And interestingly enough, the largest sector in there is cognitive, and it's also the least amount of work that's being done in terms of making experiences accessible. Now, I myself have a disability. I am dyslexic. My husband is ADHD, so you can probably guess that our children have disabilities as well. Additionally, I have lupus, so sometimes I have a flare-up and I have mobility issues or fine motor skill issues. Additionally, I have parents that are old, right? If we're all fortunate to get old, as you get older, you'll probably encounter one, if not all of these disabilities. So it's important for us to understand the number of people in our population that are affected with disabilities. So not only do we know that accessibility is a federal requirement and it's the right thing to do, but a lot of people don't know that it's financially the smart thing to do. So Forrester did some research and they said for every dollar a company invests in accessibility, they get $100 back. Now that's a return of investment of 99%, and I can't really think of anything that can offer that same type of return of investment. In addition, people with disabilities account for $1 trillion in disposable income worldwide annually. That's amazing, but the impact doesn't stop there, because people who have disabilities, their friends and families prefer to do business with brands that support accessibility. So that impact grows to $8 trillion. So we all know it's important, it's the right thing to do, it's the financially savvy thing to do, but to be honest, we're doing a really lousy job. So according to the Global Accessibility Day website, 98.1% of all landing pages fail WCAG 2.0, not just, probably a lot more fail 2.1 and 2.2, but this is where companies are putting the majority of their effort. They're putting a lot of effort to make sure those pages look amazing. So if you dig a lot deeper into those websites, the failure rate is probably a lot higher. And the number of failures per page is about 60.9 issues per page. So we all know it's a problem that we need to solve. We're all running around trying to meet this minimum standard, but we're doing a really bad job, and we're all just working in our silos. So what if we tackled the problem together? And what if we got designers and developers and UX people to work together to not only meet the minimum standard, but really reimagine what accessibility is? Because as a person with a disability, I can tell you, the digital realm can be very powerful for people who have disabilities. Digital experiences can accommodate things like dyslexia with fonts and increased contrasts and line heights and things like that. That was sort of brought to my attention by my son, who was reading on the Kindle, and he told me, "Oh, Mama, I have a dyslexic font on my Kindle, and it makes reading so much easier for me." And I was just amazed. And I use it on my Kindle as well. And that just made me think, why aren't more experiences sort of leaning into creating digital experiences to help people who have accessibility needs? So introducing the concept of Theme Builder. So what we did with Theme Builder was we thought, what if we all worked together, designers and developers, and we figured out a way to build the logic of accessibility into the core of our components. And then we could spit out some code that would take an out-of-the-box Figma file and an out-of-the-box React component library, and you could put in your design brand colors and your design system component requirements, and we could apply that accessibility layer to spit out code that would then transform that Figma library and that React library to be exactly the same, right? How much time goes back and forth between designers and developers trying to create those components that look the same in Figma as they do in React. But then we took it a little bit farther, and we said, well, what if we use that logic not only to create a theme, but what if we could do it in light mode, in dark mode, and you could turn on modes to make them mobile or desktop or tablet. And then we pushed it even farther, and we said, well, if we're doing that, maybe we can do some of those other accessibility needs or features that we know can customize an experience for someone who has a disability. So we also have layers like dyslexia or motion sensitivity, and we're introducing 8 different color mode blindness modes pretty soon. We're also doing some research into how to customize experiences for people who have ADHD. And a lot of people ask me, well, what can you do? Well, the issue is that no one's really spending time researching that. So will it be that a monochromatic theme is better? We do know that people with disability, like with ADHD, respond better to certain colors than others. We also will remove things like motion so there's no distractions, but is increasing things like contrast and line height also going to help them? So that's the research that we're going to put in. So in order to build this into our design system, we took the approach of atomic design. Now, this isn't something that's new. Anybody who's created a design system has probably heard this phrase many times, but it's a concept presented by Brad Frost, and it really takes the basic knowledge from chemistry. And the idea is that you take your smallest building blocks of design, and those become your atoms. And then you start pairing those atoms together to create molecules. So an example of an atom are, of course, like your brand colors. Another example are your fonts or your icons. And you put those things together to create something like a button. That would be an example of a molecule. Then you start pulling molecules together to create organisms. An example of that would be a card. So a card has a title, it has some body text, it has a button or two, and then you put those all molecules and atoms and organisms together to create templates, and then those templates create experiences. So that's awesome. It's a really great logic to use when you're building design systems, but still you can utterly fail when it comes to accessibility. In fact, the problem with design systems today is generally that design systems are created in context. And what I mean by that is, as a designer works in Figma, and they create buttons and hot links and all sorts of things for your design system, but they're created in context. For example, it's built on a white background, right? So if you have a beautiful blue button and you have it on a white background, it meets the accessibility requirements in the design system, but then somebody goes and moves it to a gray background or a black background or any other color, and suddenly accessibility starts to fall apart. So what we did is we decided to go subatomic. We introduced the ideas of neutrons, electrons, and protons into the design system. And basically what we did is, for every color that you introduce, we create 10 different shades of that color in light mode and dark mode, but we also make sure that every one of those colors or shades is matched with an on color. And on colors are really a principle introduced by material. But material doesn't actually require that your on colors meet the WCAG requirement. But what we do is, out of the box, we pair every one of your colors with an on color that will make sure that it meets the accessibility requirements for any colored text or icon that goes on top of that. From there, we help you select your atoms. Now, when you put your atoms together to create molecules, for example, for a button, we'll only let you pick colors that will actually create an accessible experience, which means your buttons need to have a contrast of 3.1 to your background. So when you decide what your background's gonna be, we help you create that shade and a slightly lighter shade, and we make sure your buttons fit on top of there and are accessible. But we don't stop there, because we realize that, you may have a beautiful blue button and that won't work on every color. And even if it does, when you start pairing colors together, it can create something called color vibration. So even if it meets accessibility requirements, the experience can be quite jarring. So for every component, it is created in your chosen color, but also we render them in black and in white. So anytime a component is dragged in Figma or in React into a different color background, we automatically change it so it matches the appropriate contrast guidelines in order to meet the requirements. And the engineers don't need to think about it, and the designers don't need to think about it. We've put the logic into our design system. So we also make sure that all of the pieces, as they go through, meet those WCAG requirements, which means in the end, you have accessible experiences. But the great news is, like I said, we do this for you in light mode and in dark mode. And you may not know this, but dark mode is very, very challenging. And the reason for that is, in dark mode, pure white is no longer pure white. It's white with an opacity of 0.60. which means that when you put white on top of a background, it's much harder to get that contrast requirement. You also should have colors that have a saturation point of 0.5 or lower to reduce the strain on the eyes. So we've put all the calculations in to help you do that. We also, as I mentioned, allow you to do just one design system, and all you have to do is toggle whether it's for desktop or mobile, and we'll increase your minimum target area for all your components to meet that minimum height and width. Now, that sounds obvious, but it's really not. You don't have to recreate every component for your desktop and for mobile and tablet. We do all the logic for you, and I'll show you guys a little bit more about that in my demo. So with that said, I'm gonna launch into my demo here. All right, so here we have our theme builder. Now to get started, the first thing we're gonna do is just add a name. Okay, and I'm gonna put my glasses on because my vision is going. All right, so the first thing that we need to do here is to add colors to our color palette. And here's where you'll start to see some of that magic that I was talking about come to life. So the first thing that you see is that we've created 10 colors in light mode and in dark mode. But additionally, what we've done is we have prepared them with that on color. And I'm sure the fonts are very small for you guys, but you'll see that every one of the contrasts between those colors has a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. Now, that isn't something that you automatically can do as a designer if you just created 10 shades on your own and you just made them have increasing lightness or darkness. You would find that quite a few of those colors don't make the requirements with white or black text on them. So what we do is we make small adjustments to the colors as needed for light and dark mode in order to make that contrast happen for all of those colors. So I'm going to go in and add a few more colors here to my palette. And you only need one color in your palette. If you want to have a monochromatic theme, you just need that one color, and that's totally fine. All right, so I've got 3 colors here, and I think that's good. So I'm going to go in and create a theme. Now, when we started to look at themes, what we did is we took our cues from Material UI, which has a primary, secondary, and tertiary color. You can also put as many colors into your theme as you want, so you have secondary colors. We know that that's quite important for brands to have a range of colors, but most design systems have that, primary, secondary, and tertiary color. Now, the thing that you'll notice is I start applying colors to my theme, the user interface starts to change. And we did this because we wanted you to see the impact of the user interface of your selections on the theme or the experience that you're creating. So I'm going to pick my colors. I'm going to pick my background. I can go with white, off-white. We can go to black, off-black. We can go to a very pale, very, very, very pale color versions of the primary color, or I can go to very dark shades of that primary color. I'm just going to go with white. And then you also have to pick your dark mode color. And again, these all are serving the basis for all the calculations that we're going to do for you to make sure the experience is render accessible in both light mode and dark mode. So I'm going to pick that black. The next thing I'm doing is I'm going to create gradients. Now, not everybody was like, well, why do you put gradients in here? Well, gradients is where user interfaces often fall apart because you have to have colors that have the same on color in order to put text on top of there or icons on top of there that are 100% accessible. So we introduced the idea of gradients here. And you can go from one color to another if you like. I'm just going to, in this demo, keep them the same. And then we're going to pick that button color. Remember how I said in the beginning, we're only going to let you pick a button color that meets that contrast ratio. So not only does a button need to have that contrast ratio to the background, but the text on top of it also has to have a contrast ratio of 3 to 1. So it limits the number of colors that you can have. I'm going to pick pink. All right, same with icons. Now you can get by using any color icon if you want, as long as you're using an alt tag. But again, we're trying to make this a better experience for everyone, so why not pick something that everyone can see? You can pick a gradient header, and then an accent color is really just a decorative color that will never have text or anything on top of it. And then you render your theme. So what you're gonna see here now is just the basics of your theme in light mode and dark mode. For anyone who's gonna play around with this later, the one thing you do need to do is hit save. We are working on trying to make an auto save on the theme, but right now that does not function. All right, now that we have our colors in here, there are a variety of other atoms that we can customize. For example, we have fonts. So by default, we are using Open Sans, but of course, every company does not want to use Open Sans. So you can pick what your primary and secondary fonts are going to be. I will use IBM Plex Sans, and let's see, and then maybe, let's see, Oswald. All right, as you can see again, it's starting to change in the interface as well. So other things that you need to change are probably, you can change your base font size. You can go smaller, and again, you'll see it's reflected in the interface. All font sizes are based off of that base font. And again, one thing you guys will need to note is at the moment you need to go in and reselect all these font weights. It's important that you do so right now, because as you export the code, if you don't select all of those, it might create some issues in Figma. So we're working on fixing that as well. You can also change your line heights. We can change your displays. What we did is we calculate the changes between your headers and your display heights. You can play around with it to make it as small as you or big as you like. Again, we used logic to be able to calculate the changes. Sometimes headers can kind of be all over the place. But if you're not happy with the default settings, you quickly go in here and you can customize those settings. We have the same thing for body styles, stat styles, and small text. We have something called elevations, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. In light mode, elevations are represented with increasing drop shadows, but in dark mode, they're represented with increasing lightness. So we adjust that for you as well. That is also a space where accessibility can fall apart really quickly as well. So you could have, your 9 shades of elevation and dark mode, and your button might have worked really well on elevation 1, but not necessarily on elevation 9. We also have bevels. Now we all know bevels sort of went out of style in like the 80s, I think. But we didn't want to limit our designers or anybody into the current state. So now we have bevels, inverse bevels. I think we have grooves, we have ridges, we have all sorts of recesses. We're doing all the calculations for you. Again, they go from 0 to 9. So you can just simply apply those to your molecules or your components or your organisms later, and all the calculations will be there for you. Again, we have something called the glow. So if you want to add glows to your components, you can play around with this. Now this is just sort of fun to play around with, but we have things like grid settings. I know there are companies out there that are passionate about staying to a 10-point grid system, while others 8. So again, as you change these, they change in real time. We have minimum target. For desktop, you're allowed to go down to 24 pixels. But for mobile and tablet, the idea is that you should really have 44 to 48. There's no requirement by WCAG or anyone else that they're that big, but I highly recommend it. So we allow you to control what the target areas are going to be for your desktop and mobile. We have states. We have border controls and hot link colors. Hot links is also a place where accessibility falls apart a lot. People don't know that they just not only need to have a contrast against the background, but they need to have a contrast to the text that's around them. So sometimes you can have them not underlined as long as they meet both of those requirements. If they don't, we will tell you that you can't do that because you don't have the contrast. But we also provide you for them in light mode and dark mode, and we use your button color as the basis for that. All right, so now that we've gone through our atoms, you can then go in to start attributing these to some of your molecules. Now I have a button out of the box that looks like this, but let's say I don't want a radius on my button. And let's say I want it to be bigger in height. Let's say I want a drop shadow on my buttons. We allow you to do all of these things just using the atomic principles or that you set up earlier on. So again, you can go in and customize all these things, and what we do is we create many components. People ask about this thing called small button. People say, well, how can you have a small button and a regular button? If I have a minimum target area of 48 pixels, how come this button is 32 pixels high? Well, it visually is 32 pixels high. It actually has a target area, a parent target area that meets that minimum click area. So when someone goes to try and click that, it has that click area, even though it looks smaller. And that's important visually for designers know sometimes a big button can be overwhelming in a space when you don't want it to be. So we thought about that when we created our designs. We also did the same thing with our chips. Chips look smaller or can look smaller, but that's up to you. All right, so we have all of these places where you can enter information into the molecules, but we use that logic to create a really extensive group of components for your library. And again, what we've done is we've put the logic in, so every time you render the component in any one of these colors, that it's 100% compliant. You don't need to think about it, your developers don't need to think about it, it's just is put together that way because of the logic that we put in here. So we have buttons, we have small buttons, we have group buttons, we have endless number of things. And again, we've put them all together in a way that is now 100% accessible. So can I increase the font? Yeah. Yeah, no problem. I'm trying to see where I go here. Sorry, topography. Oh, on my monitor, increase it. Is that better? Okay, all right, great. All right, so the other thing that we did is we put them together in things called organisms, which I mentioned to you before. An example of an organism would be like a hero area where you have a title, you have breadcrumbs, you have a paragraph, you have buttons, also a footer as an example of an organisms. And again, we do all the thinking for you so that when you change the background color, all the components change on it automatically. Then we put them all together, an example here called a template, where we wanted you guys to sort of visually see what it looks like when you put all of these things together. And for all of your components, organisms, and templates, you can view them in light mode and in dark mode. So again, this gives you a preview of the design system that you created, and you can go ahead and see how it's gonna render in those modes. But the next thing I want to show you is, I know yesterday they showed you how you can export the CSS into your Mu library, but today I'm going to show you how you export the code into Figma. Now, it's not a great user experience at the moment, which I'm unfortunate to say because I'm a distinguished UX engineer. But right now we're waiting for the token plugin that we're using to be able to take one file of ours and import it. They have that capability, but it breaks some of the logic that we have there, so we're waiting them to make an update to Token Studio. In the meantime, you have to cut and paste 3 different types of code into the Figma plugin. But I'll walk you guys through that. So in our Git repo, which is hosted now by Finos, which is really awesome. So Finos is one of our partners in Theme Builder. The reason they took that over is, as I mentioned, this is Discover's first ever open source project. And we were allowed to put it out there for the world to see and to clone and to fork, but they couldn't contribute back. So now we would like you all to contribute back. I also would like to mention that we're not just looking for engineers to contribute back. We want designers to contribute. We're looking for UX researchers to help us figure out different accessibility modes that we could create. We're also looking for people to figure out other ways that we can extend this. Now, the reason I say that is web accessibility is not the only place that you need to be accessible. Your PowerPoints need to be accessible. Your emails should be accessible. But we're thinking about ways that this code could be exported into Xcode or into Node.js, maybe into PowerPoint, any number of ways that this code could be exported. We're also thinking that this could be used to print things that are physical. So if you want your bill sent to you that way, if you want your credit card rendered in a different way, maybe we can go about doing that. So we would love all of you to get involved in contributing code. All right, well anyway, here is our documentation. And if you type in Figma into the search, what you'll get is a little video of what I'm going to walk you guys through right now, because it'll be kind of a blur. It's a lot. But here's directions on how to get started. So first of all, you will need a Figma a professional organizational or enterprise account. You will need a beta version, because it's the latest beta version of Figma that is using variables and modes that you're going to see in my presentation. You also need to download and install Token Studio Pro. Now that is the tool that we're using to import the JSON into Figma to render the design system the way you just saw it in the browser, rendered in the MUI library. So once you have that, you click on this and you will land on our out-of-the-box Figma file, which you download and install in Figma. Once you have that running, what you need to do is you need to open up the plugin that you installed called Token Studio. All right, and this is where the cutting and pasting happens, so bear with me. All right, so here you will see Token Studio, and basically what it is just rendering all the JSON that we have, all the logic that we have from our theme builder. You don't need to replace all of this code, but you do need to replace 3 pieces. So you're going to click on this base code here and on the JSON icon on the right. It'll expose all of that code, and then I'm going to go over to my theme builder, go to code, click on JSON, and grab the code there. I'm going to copy that, and then I will go back to my Figma file, and I'm going to grab all of this code here, delete it, and paste it, and click Save. I'll then go back again to grab the light mode code. So this is all the logic that will provide the rendering of your code in light mode. Go back to here, select my light mode code. Sorry, again, this is not the most elegant at the moment, but it works. So, all right, I'm gonna do that and paste that. You have to hit save. And then finally, I'll get my dark mode code, and that'll be the last of it, and I'll show you guys some of the magic at play. All right, then I'm gonna hit dark mode. I'm gonna go to that code. I'm gonna highlight all of that again. All right, now before I hit the next button, what I wanna do is maybe put it somewhere you can see this all starting to change. All right, and the next thing you need to do is you need to sync your variables. So I'm going to click Sync Variables. I'm going to rename and remove anything without a connection. And there's no progress indicator on Token Studio. You know that you can move on to the next step once something becomes clickable. But also, as you can see the screen on the right, everything starts changing to reflect your theme that you built in Theme Builder. So I'm going to sync my variables, and then I will start showing you guys around a bit. So again, what we did is we took the logic that you used in tokens and applied it to your design system. So all the grid systems, all the patterns, all the shadows, everything that you reflected is now built in Figma. And I will tell you from a design perspective, that's huge. I think I probably spent, I don't know, way too much time building this Figma library. And every company in the world is doing the same thing, right? But what we also do is I'll show you how this renders everything in light mode and dark mode as well. We're gonna sync the styles. All right, so now that those are synced, I'm gonna show you guys around just a second. All right, here are all the colors that you guys picked, and we have all the different shades and all the different on colors. But over here in Figma, you can now render everything in light mode and in dark mode. And that's the true for every component that you're gonna see here. And what we have charting colors that we're working on right now. This is sort of work in progress, but these are gonna be reflective of the 9 different shades or options that we provide for the different types of color blindness. There is a misconception out there among designers that there's one color palette that you can use that meets every colorblind person's need. It's not true, especially when you apply the need for it to still meet WCAG 2.2's contrast requirements in light mode and dark mode, so we're doing all that logic for you. We have our states, we have our hot links, we have all the different style components, but then we also have all of the components that you saw before rendered in MUI, now rendered to your requirements in Figma. So that's basically the idea. The idea is that we wanted to do all the logic for you, simplify the process of making light mode, dark mode, and I should also show you guys here, as I mentioned before, we have a mode called dyslexic. So what it does is it's actually replacing all the fonts with open dyslexic, which is a font that has been found for people like me and my son to be able to consume this content more effectively. It also increases the line height of the content, making it again more usable for someone with dyslexia. We're playing around with the concept of increasing the color contrast. You can also turn on motion sensitivity mode. You guys may not know this, but again, motions can, a lot of our apps today have a lot of motion. They can not only be dizzying for people, they can also make people feel a little sick, but it can actually really distract people from getting the task done that they want, which sounds silly to some of you, but it's just a fact. We also have the tablet mode and mobile mode. Now, I didn't change my target area very much in the beginning from mobile to desktop, but what it does is it changes that target area automatically for every component. It also changes your headers, which you probably saw. You don't want to be using the same header sizes on your desktop that you have on your mobile. So again, we're taking some of that logic out. You also know that in dark mode, not only we are changing, all the colors, but we reduce the brightness of your images and your videos as well. So there's a lot of things to think about that we're trying to help you guys with. So that's essentially it. I can also show you in Figma for those interested. As I started building my components, because of the whole variables, I can create just one component in one color, and then it becomes really easy for me to replicate that, because all I have to do is change the background color. Actually, I'm going to show you guys this little playground first. So I have these components here. I'm just going to grab this box of all the components, and as I drag them to different colors, they will automatically update to the colors that they should be in order to meet accessibility requirements. Again, your designers don't need to think about it. If they drag a button onto the blue background or a black background, it'll update, and these represent the light mode and the dark mode versions as well. So again, we're trying to simplify it, we're trying to make it fail-proof, we're trying to make it so the designers who aren't necessarily, schooled or knowledgeable in the area of accessibility can't go wrong, but also that their logic matches the logic that the engineers are working with too. So, all right, that's kind of it today. It was a pleasure talking to all of you, and I hope you guys learned something new, but more than anything, I hope that you guys are excited to learn more and contribute to our effort here. So, thank you all so much.